Hi everyone, this is Dikshit. Welcome to my channel. In this particular video, we will going to discuss about DevOps scenario based questions. I'm sure this video will going to definitely help somebody who is attending interviews in DevOps and also who is already working in DevOps area. Maybe out of the scenarios, you might get something and also you can adopt those things in your work culture as well. So the flow is very simple. So I'm gonna discuss about the problem statement first, and then I'm gonna answer best of my knowledge. And if you feel is there any best answer, so then you can comment it on this particular video, so that others who watches this particular video they will get benefited. The first question or a requirement or a scenario that I want to discuss is we got the requirement to deploy a three-tier application onto the Kubernetes cluster. So let's assume this is a single application where it has a UI layer, API layer, and a database. So these are the three microservices are like applications are I would like to deploy it onto the Kubernetes cluster. And so by considering the concepts like security, high availability, and resource utilization, I want to deploy this particular application. That is the requirement. So now, so I need to write obviously a lot of Kubernetes manifest files, then only I will be able to deploy it onto the Kubernetes cluster, right? So before writing the Kubernetes manifest file, first question I'll ask the requirement or whoever the reporter of this particular requirement is that whether the application has been containerized or not. That means whether the image has been created and it is available in the registry where Kubernetes can pull and it can deploy the application or not. All these kind of basic questions I'm going to ask. Let's assume if the application is not containerized at all. So then my first questions to them will be the requirement questions like what application is, what framework it is using. Requirements isn't like you can see that UI app. I assume by seeing this particular symbol, so I assume that the UI application is React JS application, and what version of a React I need to use. And I see that API application is Node.js. For this, what node environment that we require? This questions I'll ask. And is there any configuration that I need to provide for the application to bring up? Environment variables that I want to provide to bring it up. And also, I would require build instructions, commands to bring up the whole application. All these kind of information I would require. So I'm gonna take that particular information from the application owner or like whoever has provided this particular requirement. Once I receive that particular information, I'm gonna generate maybe Docker file. Assume like we are using a Docker as containerization tool. I will gonna write a Docker file, and then out of that Docker file, I will gonna create the Docker image. And out of this Docker image, I would bring up the container, and then whether it is up and running over a Docker host or not, I will gonna check. If it is yes, if it is up and running, so then what I will do is I will gonna start writing the Kubernetes manifest file. So this is where to deploy each application by considering all these points, I would use different objects. Okay. So first, let's discuss about the UI app. So UI app. So it's a stateless application. Means whatever the data that we will have it in this particular app, even if we lose that, it doesn't bother much. Is what stateless application is. So as it is a stateless, so that's where I will gonna go with the deployment object. By using the deployment object, I can deploy this particular application onto the Kubernetes cluster. And also keeping high availability in mind. So I'm gonna go with a couple of replicas. Maybe in the beginning, I'm gonna go with 3 as an initial size. So once that is done, so this particular UI app has to talk with internet, or like it should be exposed to the internet. So that's where I'm gonna create a service of type maybe load balancer or a node port. And we can also use the concepts like ingress to expose the application to the external world. So these are the concepts that I'm going to consider. And within the deployment, I will also consider using the concepts like liveness probe, readiness probe, because this liveness and readiness probe makes sure that whenever my application is stuck in some indefinite problem, so then liveness probe will gonna restart. So readiness probe makes sure that whenever the application is ready, then only it will take the request. So these concepts, by using this, I can maintain high availability. So that's where I'm going to consider using this liveness probe and readiness probe concepts as well. And apart from this liveness probe, readiness probe, and I will also consider using the resource block. So resource block is very important because when I define a resource block, then I'll have the control how much my particular pod is using the resources like CPU and memory. Because I have a point where I need to use the proper resource utilization also, right? So I'll consider using the resource block in the pod specifications. And once the pod specifications are used, the other technique that I'm going to use in pod specifications are the running pod with a non-root user. So by default, when we create a pod, right, the pod will be created with a root user. That is a wrong security practice because someone who has access to log into the pod, they can log in and they can install anything that they require. So that is a bad practice, right? So when that's why we should run always the pod with a non-root user, which increases the security of any given pod. So that's where maybe I'm going to use security context concept where I will going to run the pod with a non-root user. That is also the thing that I'm going to consider. And UI app, it is right. So I don't know how much the load will be at any given point of time. So maybe my load can increase or decrease depending on that. I need to increase the number of replicas, right? So that's where I'm going to use HPA, horizontal pod autoscaler, by using which, depending on the resource utilization, I can increase the number of pods and reduce the pods. So which will again provide the high availability of my application. And apart from this, the other objects that I'm going to use is secrets. If any secret information, sensitive information that I want to provide to the application, then I'm going to go with secrets. And I assume like the UI app also requires some configuration, like application.properties or like some configuration file it might require, right? That for that reason, maybe I would like to go with config map object. So these are all the objects that I'm going to use it for UI app. So there are many other things as well. So we can use concepts like namespaces and resource quota. So because considering this application is not only developed by one particular person, so UI app, there is a different team, API app, different team, and databases, different team. So we can consider using the concepts like namespace. So where we can create a namespace for UI app. On top of that particular namespace only, we can install this UI app so that we won't have any confusion. So somebody from API app, they may be they won't know about this particular code information. So there is a chance that if they know information, there is a chance that they can delete it or like, so maybe not intentionally they can delete it, unintentionally to get the resources they might delete it, right? So that's where it is always better to segregate the application to application pods. So I can use the concepts like namespaces and resource quota, and on specific to that particular namespace only, I can install my UI app that I can do it. So these are all the objects that I'll consider using it for like UI app. And coming to the API app, similar objects I would like to use. Again, I'm going to go with the deployment because it's a stateless application. So stateless, that's why deployment. Initially, maybe I'm going to go with again 3 replicas, and then service that I'm going to create. So ideally, it should be cluster IP because it shouldn't be exposed to the outside world or internet. So I'm going to go with the cluster IP. And then, so other best practices like liveness probe, readiness probe, and then the resource block, I will going to use these concepts. And of course, for API app also, I will going to start the pod with a non-root user only to make sure that I have non-root user, and I'll gonna run the application with a non-root user so that it will gonna increase the security of my pod. And other objects that I will gonna consider is HPA as well, because if the number of UI apps, if it is increasing, obviously there will be so many requests to the API app. So there will be much load onto the API layer also. So that's where I'll consider using HPA for this API app also. So whenever there is a load, UI app will also increase the number of pods and API app will also increase the number of pods. For like configuration and secrets, I'm going to use the secret object and config map object. So these are all the objects which are very similar for UI app and API app. So other than that, like a service object where I'm going to use the cluster IP here, but UI app is exposed to the internet where I'm going to use the load balancer. And the last part of this application is a database, and it is a stateful application. Database, when I say it's a stateful application. When it is a stateful application, what does that mean is whatever the data that we will have it in this particular pod is very important. We can't lose this particular information. So that's where whenever we have a stateful application or stateful service, so then we need to go for stateful set object. So it is very similar to deployment, but there are some slight changes like sticky naming convention. So it will gonna bring up the pods one by one. There are few slight differences are there, but for stateful application, stateful set is an object that is always best suited. So that's where I'm gonna go with stateful set. And then, so after that, so obviously, if you want to keep the backup of the data, we need to use the concepts like PV, storage class, PVC. These concepts we need to use. And by using which, I'll gonna always kind of back up my data onto some external disks so that even if my database pod goes down, so I still have the data. I can bring back the pod and a data as well, which is stored in some remote location. And then apart from this, here I'm going to use the objects like network policy also to secure my particular pod. It can accept only requests from certain pods. So this network policy, I can use it for this API app as well, so that it can accept only a request from this UI app and respond back to the UI app, not to any other pod. So the network policy, I can implement it here as well. So, but for sure, like for database, I would like to implement this network policy where it can get the request from only specific pods and it can respond to the specific pods. And apart from that, again, liveness probe, readiness probe in the databases also I'm going to use. Resources block will also I'm going to use it. All these concepts will help me to keep the database highly available. And apart from this, like there are concepts like which are operators. Like you can write your own stateful set, PV, PVC, network policies, secrets, config map, and by including liveness probe, readiness probe concepts and all, you can create a Kubernetes manifest files and you can deploy the databases. But there are already existing operators. So if you don't want to manage all these by yourself, so then there are so many operators out there in the internet where you can make use of that. So when we use this operator will have two things. One is CRD. CRD is customer resource definition, and another one is controller. So by using these two things, right, we can create databases properly and we can manage databases properly, easily and properly as well. Let me know in the comment section if you don't know what is operator, if you want me to do a detailed video on that. So let me know in the comment section so that I can do a detailed video on that. Okay, so these are all the objects that I would like to use it to deploy this particular application. So if you have any other objects or like other things that we can use it, please do mention it in the comment section. So now let's move on to the next scenario or a requirement. So the next scenario is again simple. So let's say we have application, a Golang application, and this Golang application uses a Redis cache. And so whoever wants to deploy, so the reporter or like whoever has given the requirement, what their requirement is, they have a Kubernetes cluster, which is of 8 nodes. And they want to deploy 2 replicas of Redis cache and 2 replicas of the application. But this is fine, but their requirement changes here. So they want to deploy the Redis cache, which shouldn't go onto the same node. That means whenever I want to deploy the Redis cache, it should go to the different nodes always. It should never be on the same node at all. That is one requirement. And also, it's a cache system. Redis is a cache. If Redis cache, if it is near to application, then the latency will be greater. That means the time taken to respond to any request will be faster if cache and applications are very near. So that's where what they're trying to say is like we want to deploy Redis cache first onto the different nodes, and whichever the nodes that Redis cache has been deployed on the same nodes, we want to deploy the Golang application is what their requirement is. And the requirement is. In this case, how do we achieve it? Is it possible in Kubernetes? The answer is yes, it is possible in Kubernetes. We need to use for this requirement to work. So we need to use the concepts like pod anti-affinity. So first thing is we need to use pod anti-affinity. So to deploy Redis cache. What is pod anti-affinity? So pod anti-affinity is nothing but depending on the pod label, it will gonna choose the node where it want to deploy. So pod anti-affinity is nothing but, so let's say you have a node where already a specific pod has been deployed. And in the pod affinity, pod anti-affinity, we can specify. So if a pod with a specific label, if it is already in the node, so then don't deploy it on top of that particular node is what I can say by using pod anti-affinity. So for deploying the Redis cache, that is a concept that I'm going to use for anti-affinity. So that let's assume I have two replicas. When one replica has gone to this particular node, let's assume this is node 2. And then again, so to deploy the second pod, again scheduler will check. So whether this node can I select or this node, I mean, it will gonna select. But in the pod definition, we will be having pod anti-affinity, right? So when we have pod anti-affinity, which says that so and so label, it shouldn't be deployed. So then where we can mention the Redis caches label so that the pod won't be deployed on this particular node at all. Okay. In a layman terms, if you want to say pod anti-affinity, make sure that the pod never goes onto the same node. So by using pod anti-affinity, I can deploy the Redis cache. So once that is done, so for Golang application to deploy on the nodes where my Redis cache has been deployed, right? For this, I can use the concept which is called as pod affinity. So I can use the labels of the Redis cache in the pod affinity definition so that I can choose to deploy my Golang application onto the same node where the Redis cache has been deployed. So in a summary, if I want to say the answer, so by using pod anti-affinity and pod affinity, I will going to deploy the application so that Redis cache will be never deployed on the same node and Golang applications will be deployed on the nodes where the Redis cache has been deployed. That is what it is going to happen. Okay, so moving on to the next question. So which is, so we have got one of the requirement from one of the developer. So what he has done is he has created a new branch. And in that new branch, he has updated some files. And once he has updated the files to push it to the remote repository, he has to execute, of course, these three commands, which is git add, git commit, and also git push. So these are the three commands after which like the changes will be available in the remote repository. So once he did the changes and he raised a PR, pull request, or in some cases, in some SCMs, we will call it as a merge request. Let's assume merge request or a pull request he has raised and his colleagues are like his senior lead or manager has commented to change something. Now, so he has done the changes. Let's assume he has done the changes. Now again, he has to execute git add, git commit, and a git push to push these changes to the remote repository. And let's say if we execute these three commands again, so then it will gonna create a new commit. But his requirement is he don't want to create a new commit. Whatever the previous commit that he created, for that commit itself, these changes we can add it or not is what his question is. His requirement is. So this we can achieve it. So by using the option, see after doing the changes, right, you can execute git add command. So once that is done, so you need to execute git commit. So rather than -m and the commit message, you should use options like -f amend and -f no edit. When you do this particular one, what will happen is whatever the new changes that he has made, it will be added as part of the previous commit itself. So once this is done, so then you need to push it forcefully. -f you need to use and you need to push it forcefully. So once you do that, so what will happen is whatever the new changes that is made will be part of the last commit itself. There won't be a new commit at all. Okay. So this particular scenario I faced in one of the project. In that project, they had a standard where per PR. So the rule was per PR, we should have only one commit or a fewer commits. If it's a bigger change, 2, 3 commits are fine. If it is a smaller change, it should be always one commit. So in that case, this -f amend and -f no edit was helped a lot actually in that case. So that's where you can see that I've taken one of the screenshot of the PR also here. Always you should make sure that one commit. If it is a smaller change, make sure that it should have one commit only. So if you want to do one commit, so then you need to know options like -f amend and -f no edit, so that we can add new changes to the last commit itself. And one more reason I've captured this particular screenshot and kept it in this presentation, because see, whenever you raise a PR, I've seen in some of the project who joins newly to the project, right? where they won't provide any information in the PR. So they will just raise the PR and they will gonna inform over a daily status call or in the team Teams channel where all your colleagues will be there. They will say that I've raised a PR or a MR, please review it. So that is not the way. You should provide the information about what all the changes that you are doing. You can see that here clearly. I'm doing the changes in Jenkins file, adding the new stages related to Docker build. So clear subject line I've provided. And also in the description, you should provide the issue ID. So that means the task that has been assigned to you, you should link that particular task into the PR or a MR. So that whoever reviews, right, if they have any clarifications, if they require any clarifications on the requirement, they can go to that particular task and they can see whether the requirements are correct or whatever the changes that you have made is according to the requirements or not. Okay, so that's one of the best practice that we need to maintain. And also, we need to provide a short description about what are all the changes that you did. So maybe some typo or like sentence mistakes will be there, but hope you're getting what I'm trying to say. You should provide the proper description, a short description about what are all the changes that you have done. And then, so whatever the testings, let's say if you have done the testing in the local, maybe you can attach that particular screenshot. In my case, I have run the pipeline. So that particular test pipeline I've provided you. So that even the testing information we are providing to the reviewer, so that it will be easier for them to review it. And also you will get the review at the earliest so that you can merge it and you can close the ticket as soon as possible. So this is the best practices that we need to adopt so that we can get our work review done properly and then we can merge it. And then, so moving on to the next question. So which is, so one of the developer has complained that he has written a Docker file. So where he is bringing up the application, so which is a Java application and the build tool is Maven. And also once the artifact has been created, so that artifact has to be copied onto the Tomcat to bring up the application. This is the requirement and he has written the Docker file. But here the concerns are, so the Docker image build is taking a lot of time. And then also the image size, which will be created out of this particular Docker file, which is very, very huge. That is what the concerns of the development team. And now, so they've requested, by asking any different ways where we can reduce the build time or a Docker image size. So how do we do that? Okay, in this case, if I'm there, so then I will consider using multi-stage Dockerfile because I see that here you can see that the user has taken Ubuntu image. On top of that, he's doing a lot of installations, Java installation, Maven installation, and also Tomcat installation. So many things he is trying to do. So to avoid this particular one, so I would like to go with multi-stage Dockerfile. When I go for multi-stage Dockerfile, because so this is the perfect situation where I can use a multi-stage Docker file because you can see that in this Docker file, user is doing the build and also is bringing up the application as well. So to bring up the application, we just need the var file or a tar file or a jar file, which will be created out of Maven, right? So we don't need Maven installation itself to bring up the application. So that's where, so I can use two different stages here. You can see that the first stage where I will gonna build by executing event clean install. By using this particular command, I can build the application. Once the build is done, in the second stage of the Docker file, I can use cache mechanism and I can copy the var file which will be generated in the first stage from the cache by using this particular instruction, and then I can bring it up actually. So here, so main thing is I would have definitely reduced the image size because so whenever it sees the second from, whatever the steps that would have been executed before the second from will be moved into Docker cache. So here in this Tomcat image, I don't have Maven installation. I don't have Java installation. I don't have Maven dependencies or plugins as part of a build which has been downloaded. That size also I have reduced. So that is one advantage. And also one more advantage is the build time. You can see that here a lot of installation is being happened. So here I'm not doing any installations. I'm utilizing already existing images so that the build time will also be faster. And of course, I can add a few more best practices here. So always using the latest image is not a right practice. You should mention a tag of the image that you are using here also, and also in the Tomcat image also. And also, if I use a CMD instruction or an entry point instruction, before that, it would always make sense to use a user instruction, so that we will be bringing up the container or a pod. If you have a plan to bring it up a pod, so then it will be a security best practice as well. So that I'm going to use it. Okay, so by converting this particular Docker file into multi-stage Docker file, I can reduce the build time and also I can reduce the image size. That is what my suggestion would be for that particular developer. Okay, so moving on to the next question or a scenario. So one of the development team, so they came into one of the issue where they have a pipeline which has 4 stages. One is checkout, build, test, and package stages. And they're complaining about sometimes this test stage is there, right? So it will gonna fail due to some unknown reasons. And when they rerun it, it is going through. And the similar problem, so multiple times they faced, and so they came to the DevOps team asking, can we increase the stability or like somehow solve this particular issue? Because of this, even test cases are failing. So then developer is telling that test cases are failing, so he'll spend little time to debug it. When it is not his mistake, developer feedback is not proper, so it's not a stable pipeline at all, is what they're complaining. So in this particular situation, what are all the action items, are like what are all the things that we will gonna consider to improve the stability of the pipeline? Okay, so here, if I am there in this particular situation, the first and foremost thing is, so as the team is trying to say that, so when we rerun, it is solving the problem. So that's where I will try to implement retry logic. Okay, so retry logic, I will going to implement it for this particular stage. When I use a retry logic for this particular stage, so let's say retry 3, I will say in the Jenkins, we have a block which is called as a retry. So 3 times if I give, so that means first it will execute it once. If it is failing, so then it will gonna retry 2 more times. Even after 2 more times, if it is failing, so that means it's a developer issue. It's not the pipeline stability issue. Okay, so that's where I will gonna make sure that like couple of times I will gonna read it. So by which I can increase the stability of the pipeline. And one more thing I can do is like I can enable the log of the test case execution, and I will gonna check for few more days. I will gonna monitor the pipeline. If the same test case is, if it is failing, so then I'll gonna make a note of it and I'll gonna reach out to the specific team. I will say them like this particular test case is failing again and again and again. When we retry, it is going through. So sometimes it is failing. So I'll gonna raise a ticket to them or like ask them to check it out, so that they will gonna check and come back to me. So these are all the action items that I will gonna consider to take solve this particular problem. Basically, retry is the block I will gonna use it at the first uh, place to solve the stability issue of this particular pipeline. And moving on, the next scenario is, or a requirement is, so very simple. So we have a pipeline where we have a couple of stages. You can see the clone stage, dependency file download stage, static code analysis stage, and build stage, and likewise unit stage, unit test, integration test cases, Docker build, Kubernetes deploy, API testing. These are all the stages which are there. And also I've given what are all the times that each stage will going to take. You can see that clone is taking 5 minutes. The download dependency file is taking 5 minutes to 7 minutes, because it depends on the responsiveness of the Artifactory. Assuming this dependency file I'm downloading from Artifactory, and then static code analysis 3 minutes here. And also there is one statement which is very important. Sometimes it fails due to the downtime of the Sonar queue. So that I need very important to note. And the build taking 30 minutes, 15 minutes for unit test cases, integration test cases is 15 minutes. Docker build is taking around 2 minutes. Deploy is taking 2 minutes, and API testing is taking 15 minutes. So the overall pipeline execution time is 1 hour 20 minutes is what it is taking. And so they've executed. Let's assume this pipeline has been executed for the second time also. And it is observed that it is taking the same time. So 1 hour 20 minutes only it is taking, and the manager is complaining that so the step you can see that there is no improvement in the pipeline execution time, because the first time it's okay wherein it can take much time. For the further times, like the second time, third time, so if it is taking the same time, so assuming this is the Maven build and Maven unit test cases and all, so it shouldn't take this much time. So then how do we basically make sure that though we will reduce the execution time of the entire pipeline? So that is what the requirement scenario that we are in. So now we need to suggest the ways or correct the stages in such a way that it should reduce the execution time. Okay. So to solve this particular issue or a problem or to improvise pipeline execution time. So first, a few things is what I will gonna look at. So first, I will gonna see which are all the stages are dependent or independent. So first and foremost thing is clone and download dependency file. Okay. So these are two independent stages. So there is no rule that like after clone only this download dependency file should run. So even clone can happen parallelly and download dependency file also can happen parallel. So that's why rather than executing this two stages sequentially, I will gonna execute it parallelly. Okay, so that when I execute it parallelly, almost 5 minutes of my execution time I can reduce. That is one thing. And also, so 5 minutes for the clone, it is a very huge time. I would consider like it's a huge repository, and 5 minutes, it is, I would say in the CI, it is not acceptable at all. So it should be around like 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes is higher. I would consider. If it is taking 5 minutes, maybe I would see a different ways to reduce this clone time. So there are a lot of strategies here. So we can use options like -f and dep so that we can we can download only the last commit information. So if you are not interested in downloading the commit information, and also we can use -f and single branch to download or like to clone only branch whichever we require in this particular pipeline. That option I can use. And we have -f and references option also, by using which we can reduce the clone time even more. So I'll consider all these options. Let's assume by considering those options, I've reduced clone time from 5 minutes to 3 minutes. Okay, so absolutely, wherein the download dependency file, if it still takes 5 or 7 minutes, so it will be as I'm executing parallelly, right? It will still take 5 minutes itself. Assume like it is taking now, rather than spending 10 minutes, I am spending 5 minutes for both cloning and also download dependency. Okay, this is one. And also as download dependency file is there in Artifactory, right? Which is a different tool system. My Jenkins, let's say it is there in a AWS EC2 machine, which is installed on AWS EC2 machine. And rather than downloading this dependency file from the Artifactory, what I can do is maybe I can put it in S3, and from S3, I can download it a little faster than Artifactory. So rather than depending on this Artifactory, sometimes it can go in an unresponsive state. You can see that that's why there is a variation in the time also, 5 minutes to 7 minutes. If I go with a more stable uh, remote locations like S3, would be better. Maybe I might get a better performance also, because my Jenkins is hosted on AWS itself. Within the same network, I can get the faster speed also. So now if clone is reduced to 3 minutes, if I move this dependency files to S3, so then I can, maybe there is a chance that I can reduce this also to 3 minutes. So that from 5 minutes, I can definitely bring it down to 3 minutes also, right? So, so now for to execute this particular stage sequentially, it used to take 10 minutes. Now, because of parallel and other improvements, it is brought down to 3 minutes. Or like, let's assume due to parallel stage, it is still 5 minutes. Okay, but anyway, I've reduced 5 minutes. This is fine. In first two stages, I could able to reduce a bit. And then next is static code analysis. So this is also very important. 3 minutes, maybe 3 minutes is okay. So it might take this much time because it has to communicate with SonarQube and get the quality gate status, and then it should respond back to the Jenkins, right? So I would say maybe still it is 3 minutes is okay. And very important thing is sometimes fails to do downtime of the SonarQube. This is very, very important thing. Okay. So let's say if SonarQube is down and your pipeline has executed and clone has been executed and download dependency, and then this is getting executed. And there is a chance that downtime of the SonarQube might also be there. Or sometimes like for a minute, SonarQube might not respond also. In this cases, again, I can use a retry strategy. Retry 3 times maybe I can use. So first time it will gonna try. If it is not working, just provide some delay. Try it for one more time. And if it is not working, give it a little more time, try it, retry it again. So I can implement retry so that in case of SonarQube is unresponsive for a while, so it can solve by using this retry logic. But let's say if it is a downtime, so then what will happen? So all the pipelines, it executes a clone download dependency, and then it comes to Sonar Cube static code analysis, and it will fail. Okay. So this we can avoid it actually. So how we can avoid it? Before the clone itself, we can have one stage. I would say maybe pre-check stage where we can check all the dependent tool statuses. Like let's say SonarQube, let's say we have Kubernetes is also dependent tool because it's not comes under Jenkins tool stack, right? So let's say Kubernetes is also dependent tool, and also Artifactory where Docker build base images being stored in the Artifactory. So where I can check the status of all the dependent tools in the pre-check stage, so that if anything fails, if anything is not healthy, so I won't proceed itself, because anyway I know that my pipeline will gonna fail. Why I want to proceed? So by introducing this particular check, many advantages will be there. So here one is, main thing is we would have uh, saved the Jenkins resources, because it, I mean, by let's assume after executing all the stages, if it is failing at the Kubernetes because of the downtime, so then it's a anyway negative response for the user. So you would have avoided at the beginning itself by using pre-check, right? So by which you would have saved the resources of the Jenkins and developer feedback. So when you have a pre-check, if something is failing, you can send him the reply back saying that there is some tool downtime is there, retry after some time, so that you can concentrate uh, that particular time onto other work also. So developer feedback will be faster, and also we have saved the resources. So when we save the resources, obviously the cost will also be saved a lot in Jenkins. Okay, so this is the thing that I would like to implement it, retry and also pre-check stage, so that I can check all the dependence tools health at the beginning itself. And the next one is build. I can see in the first one also, I'm assuming it's a Maven build. As I mentioned, it's a Maven build itself. So the first run is also taking 30 minutes, and the second run is also taking 30 minutes. It shouldn't be the case, right? Because if the first run is already happened, all the dependencies, plugins will be already downloaded. If it is already downloaded, it shouldn't take the same time. Maybe at least 5 minutes or 10 minutes should have been decreased. So if the cache is not implemented, I would like to implement that. So let's say, for example, after implementing that cache, we have saved the, we have reduced this build execution to 25 minutes. Again, after implementing cache, I would have saved 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here. And I've implemented the retry logic here. I've increased the stability of the pipeline. That is also very, very important thing. And the next thing is, again, I can see that unit tests and integration test cases are not dependent at all. So they can run it parallelly. So they are independent stages. So build is required, obviously, to apply the unit test cases and integration test cases. So that's the reason. So after the build, I can run this unit test case and integration test cases parallelly rather than executing sequentially. When I execute it parallelly, so I can save again 15 minutes. So here I can reduce 15 more minutes by executing parallel. So this is one strategy I'm going to use. And the next things, maybe I don't think so I can improvise the time here, because it is taking idle time itself here. API testing and Kubernetes deploy and Docker build, all these things are taking a normal time itself. Maybe so these are all the things I consider uh, to improve the pipeline execution or to increase the stability of my pipeline. Okay, Artifactory check also I would have done in the pre-check, so that it will gonna check the Artifactory health there itself. Okay, you can see that almost by using a simple strategies itself, I reduced almost like 30 minutes of the build time. Here, the 15 minutes, and here 5 minutes by enabling the cache, and here 5 minutes. Almost like 20 to 25 minutes I have reduced. And one more thing is like nowadays, in many of the pipelines, I've seen like per stage, for every stage, they will gonna use Docker as an agent. So if the Docker image is not there in the slave, so it will try to download it from the Artifactory. Even that is added to the execution time. So what I will do is, as part of like bringing up the node in the Jenkins, right? Maybe I would like to download all the Docker images which are referred in my build, so that it will be faster. My execution will be faster. So this can also improve my execution time. So these are all the strategies or like methods that I can increase to stabilize or like reduce the execution of my time. Okay. So let's move on to the next question. So next question or a scenario is uh, we have a pipeline. So let's assume 50 microservices are there. For 50 microservices, 50 pipelines are there. In that all 50 pipelines, there is one stage, which is static code analysis stage, which is very similar. So Sonar Cube team has given the steps. Everybody uses this particular step, except this build command. So maybe varies from team to team. They will going to change it. But these particular steps are very, very common. And always, so what the Sonar Cube team says is like sometimes we have got the regular updates on this particular uh, steps actually, and it can be any changes. Sometimes they will ask to change the command itself. Sometimes they will ask to change this timeout or like this particular error message. A couple of changes, repeated changes. They're asking us to do changes. Okay, if it is a case, if it is referred, or like if it is this definition, if it is there in all 50 pipelines, so then what I need to do, I need to go for each pipeline and then I need to change it. As a DevOps team, we are maintaining the pipelines. I need to go to each pipeline and I need to update the code. So that is what I need to do it. But unfortunately, this is a lot of managing work, right? So it's a manual work again. So managing all 50 pipelines would be really, really difficult. So here on, as it will be a manual effort, so changing the pipeline again and again. So here and there, we can make a mistakes and it can impact the pipeline execution itself. So that's where. So manager asked like, is there any way or like uh, action item that we can take so to improvise this particular scenario where we don't want to take a risk or like we don't want to change in multiple pipelines because it's the same block. Why can't we keep it at some standard place, and whenever we want it we can just refer it? Right? Is there any mechanism in the Jenkins? The answer is we have a mechanism which is called as a shared library in Jenkins. Okay, by using which whenever you see a common steps in couple of pipelines, what you can do is you can take that particular common steps into the shared library. Shared library is nothing but one more repository, which is obviously according to the standards of Jenkins shared library format. We can extract this particular common steps and put it onto the shared library. And whenever we need that particular steps, so then we can call that particular steps onto our Jenkins file and then we can refer it actually. To refer and to configure the shared library, there are a couple of different steps. If you want to know that, so I will gonna provide a video link. So I've already made a video on shared library. How do we write a shared library? How do we consume it in shared library into the Jenkins pipeline? I made a video. I'll gonna provide the videos link in the description. You can go ahead and watch it. So to manage any repeated code in multiple pipelines, we can simply use a shared library. And whenever we want to refer, we can refer. So that if any changes that you want to do, you don't need to do it in the pipelines. You can directly do it in the shared library so that it will gonna get impact in all the pipelines where you have referred that particular steps. And the next question, I would say, be the last question in this particular video. So one of the pipeline team, so they had one pain point. So the pain point is very simple. So they have a couple of pipelines where they've used a Docker build stage where it is building a Docker image. And what they will do is once the pipeline is run completely successful, so they will going to pull that image and they will going to test it in local. To pull that particular image, they need to know what is the image that is created out of that particular run, right? So then for that, what they used to do, they used to basically go to the entire build and then they used to get to know the image name. So it has been a very difficult thing because the logs are very huge. So Jenkins will gonna load a bit to see the entire logs. So that's where they're complaining. So can you make it little easier? Because you can see that in this build execution, if there is only one strategy for Docker tagging, so then it's easy for them to do it or like construct the image name. So let's say if in some pipelines they're using the Jenkins build number as a Docker tag, in some pipelines if they're using the commit, git commit to construct a Docker image, so then it will be really difficult, right? So that's where their pain point is, like provide some easy way to identify the Docker image name rather than going through the entire logs. So that's where to tackle this particular scenario, our pain point. So what we can do is, so we can use, there is a concept or like inbuilt variables in the Jenkins itself, which is current build. So if you don't know, please read about this particular one. There is a current build, a variable or a method which is there in the Jenkins by which we can set the build description actually. Maybe once the build is executed successfully, I can provide the image name in the build description so that every build will have the image name. They can easily get the image name by going into the just Jenkins job page. They don't need to go through the logs at all. By current build method or a variable, so I can set that particular image name so that they can easily read that image name and then they can use it in their their uh, workflow actually. Okay, the other way is maybe you can construct one more stage where we will gonna filter out the log and then take the image name itself and then you can send out an email also. Because I would say sending an email will be too much because for every successful build, if you say my Jenkins will be overloaded by sending a lot of mails itself. Rather than that, we can just print it on the build description so that the users can come and check the build description and they can pull the Docker images and then they can start the containers. That is how they can do it. Okay. So that's all. So that's all for this particular video. If you've liked the video, please like, do share it, and also subscribe to the channel. And that motivates me to do more and more videos like this. Thank you. Have a great day. Bye bye.